They say all is fair in love and war, but all is not fair. Why do the good die young? Why does evil prosper?
People who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
In this series, love and war find their beginning. Only by knowing their past do we get clues as to how the story ends.
The Bible does give President Trump moral authority to use whatever force necessary.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. How quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
When the mystery was revealed, no one knew how long it would be, and nighttime was falling on the world. After they left the garden, that first couple began to have children, but with greater access to the mind, Lucifer and the legions began disseminating their campaign to anyone who would listen. And eventually, one of those sons rose up and killed the other. As more children were born, they would choose sides in the war. One side believed liberty was only granted with self-control and self-government, and the other believed that liberty was license, and to follow desire was the highest ambition. One lived to love others, and the other lived to love self. And with each passing generation, it became clear that unless something drastic happened, unless there was an intervention, mankind would become extinct. The Earth's ecosystems were collapsing, and it was hard to get anyone to see it. And with humanity's appetite unchecked, what would prevent us from eating the animal kingdom into extinction? With humans living nearly 1,000 years, there was little that they could not set their hearts and minds and appetites to. And the reason this sounds familiar is because we're witnessing similar scenes, and the creation is crying out, and it seems no one is listening. We can only live so long for self without any regard for others until extinction is the result. There are only so many trees to cut down to grow food for animals that we will eat until finally collapse happens. You know, in those years after the garden, selfishness was rampant. Greed, lust, violence were out of control, and man gloried in his works, his things, his accomplishments, himself. Violence increased daily, and selfishness became the norm, and anyone who even hinted at the covenant was hunted and destroyed if possible. Marriage was no longer sacred, and war was the norm. Few remembered how the war had even began in Janah. And more the legions convinced man that he was to become like the gods. There was no supreme God. All were gods accountable only to themselves. And the legions and guardians were only permitted to intervene in the affairs of mankind when asked. But in the midst of all this chaos, one man held on to hope. He lived in accordance with the covenant. He believed love and kindness were more sustainable than violence and selfishness. And finally, he was warned in a dream that without intervention, mankind would become extinct. He was warned of a coming climate catastrophe, a global storm. You know, you have to remember that the entire Earth was a tropical paradise, a perfect climate everywhere. All life was watered from beneath, and man had all he needed to live a long, healthy life. They could do anything they put their minds to. Their civilizations and technology, many believe, were far advanced of anything we see today. We know they began to venture into bioengineering and splicing DNA together, and chimeras and animals for warfare, harvesting organs for immortality. Anything they could imagine, or at least thought they were imagining. You see, with abilities beyond our realm, the legions have the ability to instill thoughts and ideas into a mind where we are very prone to believe that we are the originator of that concept or that idea, but in reality, in many cases, these ideas are being given to us by Lucifer and the legions, and yet few realize what's really going on. This idea, it's gaining wisdom today especially, that we're going to get knowledge from intelligent alien life. This is nothing new. Humans were just as prone to the idea thousands of years ago that if other forms of life have been around longer than us, then of course they know more than us. And since we're always progressing, always evolving, then of course they are light years ahead of us. But there was a price for this wisdom, and that price was allegiance, devotion, war, worship, whatever is requested. And the Legion race, they're playing this long game, while we humans, with our finite minds, we're too often thinking with our short lifespan on the earth. It's really not fair. And for nearly a century, the Guardians were teaching the craft architect. And with these revelations, he shared with anyone who would listen how they could escape the coming crisis. This climate catastrophe, this cosmic storm, was nothing like our world or any world had ever seen. Water from just beyond our atmosphere began to fall like rivers through the firmament. It shot up from the crust of the earth with equal pressure. The winds picked up, the waters began to rise, waves began to form. And then there was the shriek of the hurricane. And men tied themselves to the largest animals, knowing that these animals will do whatever it takes to survive and find higher ground. And then the Guardians were sent to protect this craft that had been built with few survivors and animals who were inside of it. And those inside were filled with terror. All the realms watching this were in shock. Death was everywhere, and few really understood why this was happening. And there was only this small number of 8 humans saved from the destruction. But the promised one, who they'd looked to for thousands of years, this coming Savior who had the keys of life and death, he's not in this small family. So what was going on? Well, one of the sons of the chief builder, he'd not been the most supportive of the whole endeavor, and though he was saved physically from the storm, the desires of his heart were fanned by the whispers of Lucifer himself. And he kept having this thought that Jah and Michael were unfair. Lucifer told him how man was on the verge of greatness just before the storm. And this son, who we know as Calm, was separated from this small family, and he and his wife and son began to build an empire with a tower at its center that would, if possible, allow them to escape Earth and enter the realm of the gods. They knew that there was this secret. If they could just escape Earth, they could colonize Jannah, and if possible, attain to their divine calling, which was tearing Jah from the throne and taking what was rightfully theirs. This tower was unlike any structure ever built before or after. 20 miles at the base, all of Calm's descendants were required, and we could say forced, to help build this metropolis. But they were giants, believed to be 18 feet tall at this time. Lucifer is inspiring them at every step of the way. And his legions are assisting in the building with their strength, their wisdom. Everyone believed this was going to be possible, to make a tower that would pierce through the atmosphere. There's talk of space elevators today. This was like a space staircase. And then the Guardians were told to go down and confuse their language. And the result led them to stop building the tower and to spread out all over the earth. And without that, what was really going on was the building of a metropolis with the desire for global domination by force, and ultimately Lucifer's attempt to recreate the city of Jannah on the earth. When men like Nimrod realized the Guardians were actively engaged in the affairs of man, he and others began to yield their bodies and minds to the full possession and control of the legions. They would then build these temples and offer sacrifices to these supposed gods. And the humans would use hallucinogens that helped them completely turn off any ability to resist the possession of Lucifer and his followers. Lucifer offered these men power, sex, wealth, pleasure, in exchange for devotion to his cause. But man believed he was worshiping advanced beings from other realms, or fallen war heroes, with greater power than any human had yet attained, and yet they didn't really understand the full story yet. When we hear reports of ancient visitors to this planet like the Anunnaki and other intelligent beings, could it be that these are just names for this fallen race of beings from Jannah? They'd often change their names, but it seems they always were the same. These legions posing as gods under the names of Baal, Ashtoreth, Zeus, Chemosh, Marduk, Milcom, Moloch, Ra, Anubis, all the gods of legend and myth. And then they'd tell men that they were fallen heroes of ages past, or visitors from other realms or planets with advanced knowledge that mankind had not yet attained to. And they'd often appear as these huge beings, far superior to man in strength and knowledge, and they'd reveal their secrets of technology, totally foreign to man. And with their understanding of the laws of nature, these beings could manipulate the weather. So you can see why we have these myths and legends of the gods of thunder and rain and lightning and earth and sky and sea. And there are some writings of the oracles in history that describe how these gods are going to one day return to this earth, to the great cities, to perform the same apparent miracles that they did in ages past. Some of them masquerading as heroes or beings from other worlds, just like they always have. And is there anything we've been told so that we're not deceived by this coming deception? Well, there is this one idea that is almost universally accepted today that prepares the world for the arrival of these beings. That is the belief that the dead are not dead. See, most people today believe death is just this passing of the soul from this realm to another, and that the souls of the dead can visit man and reveal secrets and mysteries to us. There is no greater bond than love. It is the strongest of all emotions. We can't understand it intellectually. It can only be experienced. And Lucifer knows of its power. See, it was his job in Jannah to reveal this principle, which we would call the covenant, to all realms when he was the chief ambassador in Jannah. But Lucifer, the light bearer, abandoned the covenant and twisted its meaning, and he proudly promotes his policy and campaign slogan today that license is liberty and that love is desire. Up until this climate catastrophe of the deluge, death had been a total mystery. Most men believed that when you died, it was over. And some believed, well, I think there's hope, but they didn't really understand it. And Lucifer capitalized on this, but even he didn't fully grasp it. He wasn't sure if death was eternal or if man would somehow be recreated, somehow, some way. Well, regardless, he took matters into his own hands and he began to have his legions make it appear as though relatives were coming back from the grave to reveal secrets hidden from mankind, when in reality, it was just the impersonations by Lucifer and his fallen followers. And slowly and gradually, the majority of mankind today believes this phenomenon to be true. So we should ask ourselves, is there any danger to believe this? For billions of people today, the idea of a loved one staring down or visiting from paradise is a thought that seems comforting. But if death is just a door into the next life, then why do we sustain life? Why do we fight so hard to live? Why would we live in light of the covenant? Why love at all if you can just enjoy being selfish? If all we need to do is die and then go into the next life, what prevents us from just wanting to find that escape? Get all you can out of this life by whatever means, as much as you can, and then enjoy the next life as soon as this one ends. Live however you want. Jannah is your home. This is the lie. This is the campaign motto of Lucifer. I remember when my dad died a few years ago, it was like a part of me died. And the worst part of death is wishing you had done things differently when somebody was alive. And I recognize now that I totally took my dad for granted. And months after, all I could do was dream about him. It went on for years, to be honest. I just wanted to see him. I just wanted to be with him one more time. And when we lose someone we love, this is often how we feel. We would do anything to see that person. I kept having these dreams, and I didn't know what was real and what was not. But if we understand the teaching of death based on the sacred writings, death is in reality like a sleep. And our loved ones are at peace, not looking down on us, not seeing our turmoil and pain, not coming back to visit us, not being tortured in some flames of an imaginary hell. But that craving to be with them, that is real, and that is almost overwhelming sometimes. And for many in the ancient world, they begged for it. They wanted this experience, and they went to mediums to talk to who they thought were their dead relatives. And let's be honest, that's just not in the ancient world. We see it pretty much in everything Hollywood produces today. It's like a signature. You know, there's a story of an ancient king. He'd banished any communication with the dead from all the land. He knew it was just the fallen spirits masquerading as loved ones or visitors from other realms. And yet, Saul craved an experience, an emotional high that would satisfy his sorrow. So he goes to this witch, this necromancer, this medium, and he pleads to talk to a friend who had recently died. He knows it's not his friend who's conjured up in this seance, but he doesn't care. And he throws caution to the wind. You see, this is Lucifer's favorite method of deceiving people. And sadly, today, nearly the whole world believes all this is real, that we can communicate with those who've passed on. And this is leading somewhere, and it's leading somewhere terrifying, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But you should know this. The legions are highly organized. They have specialties in evoking emotions in mankind like strife, intemperance, unkindness, selfishness, greed, jealousy, passion, ambition, competition, appetite, lust, hatred. But the good news is the Guardians have specialties too. And as you can see, we clearly aren't alone. We are in the midst of a war bigger than ourselves. And what the legions couldn't do, Lucifer himself decided he must do with a one-on-one battle with the Prince of the Covenant. And we're going to talk about that in our next episode.